In this chapter, I'm going to talk about interpretive planning and introduce you to what it is and why it might matter to you. Places come with such interesting baggage, all different places, heritage buildings and parks and trails, public squares, and they often have stories to tell, some history or interesting nature or culture involved. And wanting to tell those stories is pretty natural. So this presentation is really for people who are interested in some strategies for how to tell those stories. Interpretation is the art of explanation. So we engage with several different questions, and some of the main ones that might be of interest to visitors to a place are the following. Why is this place here? Why does it exist at all? Why might it be important? We might wonder who has visited it before. Have famous or important or notorious people been here? Are there groups or individuals who might have special ties to this place? People who care deeply about it or for whom it carries some emotional bond or baggage? Is there important indigenous history that deserves to be revealed in this place? Or what plants or animals might be unique to this place? Are there kinds of things that people might see along the way that they might want to know more about or identify? And just, on that note, recently I've got into looking for mushrooms, and this is called turkey tail, which is very common in Nova Scotia. I think it was revealed to me on an interpretive panel somewhere, and now that I know what it looks like, I'm actually able to recognize it everywhere, every time I go out hiking or wandering around in the woods. Now, there are lots of different ways you can interpret. I've mentioned interpretive panels already, and that falls into a whole category of what we call narrative interpretation. There are things that might tell a story using words that explain some past situation or past story. But it's not the only way to interpret things in public spaces. We also have implication, which might be a way of embedding words and symbols into the place to induce curiosity. We might not tell a story explicitly, but we might have, in the concrete, a certain symbol that's important, or some kind of pattern that may be important to the indigenous peoples in a given place. Those are two ways in which we could embed interpretation into the built environment, but we could also have human interpreters, people who are walking around in the present day telling stories or explaining some past, answering questions from people. That's pretty common in national parks and provincial parks. And then there's also the possibility of reenactment, which might include actors reenacting some historical event or telling stories and answering questions from some specific invented viewpoint. And I'm not going to get into the human interpreters in this presentation at all. I'm thinking mainly about built environment interventions, but it's useful to know that that human element can always be there too, and it's a very engaging way to tell stories. But let's say there are no humans involved and we want to have something that people can engage with directly. I'll just give you a couple examples here. So written narrative. These are very long panels, but this is from a museum in Brule, Nova Scotia. This is the kind of written narrative I'm referring to. Someone can step up to the panel and read about some themes and stories, and they may be associated with artifacts or with visuals of various kinds like photography, illustrations, historical maps, and other things. Implication is kind of like this. This is actually a public art piece from Calgary in Alberta, and it's a public art piece at the Calgary Stampede, a very popular and famous event that happens every year in Calgary. And this is representing icons of 5 First Nations in that area. The story is not told explicitly about the 5 First Nations, but the symbols that are important to them are told through this public art. And this is the kind of thing that may cause people to ask questions, which is a really nice thing. We want people to think for themselves and get interested. And when they see this kind of thing through implication, they may want to know more. Reenactment, we might use historical objects or historical architecture to tell that story and involve human interpreters in enacting things. And just to close off here, this first chapter, in doing this work, you might wonder, who does this? Who does interpretive planning? And really, lots of different people can engage in this kind of work. You could be a planner, as I am. You may be an English major or a historian. You may be a museologist, somebody who works in museums. You could be a live interpreter or an artist or a public artist. And there might be all kinds of other pasts that you may be working with in order to do interpretive planning. So no formal training or certifications required in this work. It's a requirement that you are interested in the stories you're telling and that you are a thoughtful person who is able to talk to people and learn about a past or interesting stories. So just to take you back through this chapter, there are a whole bunch of different ways you could interpret a place, and that might include narrative interpretation, might include doing things through implication or using human interpreters to tell a story on the ground. And also I wanted to just remind you again that, that anybody can do interpretive planning, and you don't have to be a certified interpretive planner. No such thing exists. In the next chapter, I'm going to get into why we might master plan and why thinking things through ahead of doing designs, ahead of getting too far down the road, is important in doing interpretive planning.